All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our second live Q&A today on summer pests. I'm here with Dr. Jason Graham, who's going to kick things off in a second with his quick presentation for 10 to 15 minutes on all things summer pests. After that, we'll open things up for Q&A. So if you have some questions, please hold on to them or throw them in the chat, and we'll definitely get to them today. And if you left any questions on any of our posts promoting this live, we'll definitely answer those. And just a friendly reminder, no dumb or stupid questions. We have tons of beginners and tons of advanced hobbyists, but throw any of your questions our way, and we will answer anything that we don't get to in the blog that will come out after this. We'll send a full replay and recording of the Q&A in an email tomorrow to all the folks in the group that are already here. And Jason, I will, without further ado, kick it off to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Magda. Appreciate you. And thank you, everyone that's been able to join this conversation. I'm excited to dive into it. It's an important topic. So we could just jump right in. Primal Bee Pest Management. So this is me, my background. I went to University of Delaware, where I first got into beekeeping. Went on to University of Florida, did my master's and PhD in bees. Have since been working with nonprofits as well as working with endangered species of bees. And now I'm here happy with Primal Bee and glad to find the hive that really works well for me. Ready to go to the next slide. So we're going to dive into a few honeybee pests just to make sure everybody understands the pests first that we're going to cover. So varroa mites, a huge problem in the U.S. They could be potentially on the bees as phoretic mites, where they go from hive to hive. They could also be in cells, where they would do a lot of their reproduction in the brood cells. So there's lots of different ways to manage them. The important thing is kind of monitoring their levels and trying to keep the population as low as possible. So I'm going to give you some strategies for that. Next slide. And I could probably do a whole, talk on just varroa mites and all the different possible treatments. And each of these pests really could, use their own talk. So I'm really just going to cover the basics right now. Tracheal mites, kind of usually less of a problem. You can see this K shape to their wing, to the honeybee's wing. This indicates that they may have a tracheal mite infection. And in order to look at the tracheal mites, you actually have to have a microscope and do a dissection and look at the breathing tubes of the bee to see if these mites are in them. But this K shape to the wing, when the bees are just resting or in the hive and their wings are this K shape, that's something that might indicate you have a tracheal mite problem, and there are ways to deal with it. And a lot of these are similar to some varroa mite treatments, but I guess we'll jump on to the next slide. Not for tracheal mites, we're not seeing that as big of an issue for folks in the US as varroa mites for sure. Tropolelaps mites, these are a threat, but they're not in the US yet. So they're in Asia now, and we're guarding against tropolelaps mites. If you suspect you may have tropolelaps mites, there's contact your local extension office, and there are different watch programs, trying to make sure that tropolelaps do not become a problem for American beekeepers. Go on to the next slide. Small hive beetles. So these can be a problem really geographically. They like to burrow in sand or sandy soils. And they can do this below the hive. This is where they pupate in the ground. There's methods to keep them out of the hive, to trap them while they're in the hive, or to potentially kill them while they're in the soil. You could also use ground cloth and things like that to keep small hive beetles to a minimum. Hive tool always works to kind of smash them, but we could talk more about small hive beetles if you'd like. And we'll go on to the next slide. So these are some of the traps that we can use. Swiffer pads have been used to capture small hive beetles. There's several baits, traps that you can fill with a small amount of apple cider vinegar and mineral oil, and this will trap and kill the beetles, attract trap and kill the beetles, but these need to be regularly cleaned and exchanged. So we can talk about any of that. And the next slide. Wax moths. So these can be a problem in all kinds of hives. They can chew on wood, they can chew on EPS. And so the controlling against wax moths is important. Kind of the differences you'll see between wax moths and small hive beetles they're in the larval stage. The wax moths spin webbing, whereas the small hive beetles kind of make they make a yeast which spoils the honey and ferments the honey. And so also looking at the prolegs on the wax moths and the small hive beetle larva, you can tell the difference. The wax moths are more caterpillar-like, while the small hive beetles are more grub-like. And we can share kind of images to, where you can differentiate between the two. Wax moths generally only attack very weak colonies, but when they get in, it's a problem. They also will go to undefended colonies. So if you have undefended frames, anything that has beeswax, honey, or brood on it, the wax moths can go to that material even if there's no adult bees present, and that's when they make the biggest mess. So controlling wax moths in a preventative measure is important. Okay. Next slide. Ants. Ants can be a problem. A lot of times they're just scavengers, and I try to watch the ants and their trails to be able to figure out what the problem is. So if they're going in between the top cover and the nest box, then maybe last time I was in the hive, I squished a couple bees when I was putting the lid back down, and they're going to the proteins from those dead bees. So kind of cleaning that area is helpful to reduce the amount of ants you might have. Maybe I spilled some sugar water in the feeder. This can attract ants. If there is a lot of debris on the varroa tray, ants can go to that too. So kind of watching where the ants are going helps you to determine what they're attracted to, and you can kind of deal with it in that way. The other direction where they're coming from helps you to know where their nest is located, and there you could do kind of more preventative treatment by controlling the nest. Go to the next slide. A couple strategies we have for controlling ants. We could use tree tanglefoot. This is a sticky barrier that ants can't climb up. It's good to always have your hives elevated for any kind of pest. So having a hive stand that you could put an ant moat under. So in the bottom picture to the left, you can see the ant moat. This is basically a liquid we would add to here, some maybe oil, something that's not going to, it could be soapy water, but ideally something that's not going to be attractive to the bees, and also kind of reduce the amount of ants, or the ability for the ants to climb across that moat. We've also used diatomaceous earth around the hives. This is in the bottom middle, and it's a scratchy material that scratches the exoskeleton of any kind of insect, so bees included. You wouldn't want to put this in your hive, but you could put it around the bases of your hive stands, and ants that cross it, their exoskeleton gets scratched up and they basically dry out. I've also found that mylar tape can be used kind of to cover seams, or to ants don't like to walk across it. So kind of creating little barriers with the mylar tape is helpful. I have wood filler up there because if you have any gaps in the sidewalls or something like that ants will be able to access, you could close those off with a wood filler. And kind of last case scenario, I use these taro ant baits, which the ants come to. They take a poison back to the queen and kind of kill the colony in that way. I try not to use this as much around bees, but if it becomes a really problem situation, then this is what I'll use. Okay, next. So the yellow-legged hornet, these are, or just in general, any kind of wasp. So the yellow-legged hornet is an upcoming threat to bees. We're seeing them arriving in some of the southern states, and they can kill many bees. What they do is so first they'll begin by collecting dead bees out front of the hive. Then they'll start taking live bees. Eventually they'll go into the hive, bring more scouts with them, and they could invade the hive itself. And they're chewing up the bees, the larva, the pupa, and feeding it to their offspring, the young yellow-legged hornets or wasps developing on that protein diet. So controlling these really is reducing your entrances, adding anti-robbing screens or things like that to the front of your hive is helpful. There are a lot of initiatives to try to find where they're spreading. So if you suspect you have yellow-legged hornets, try to get a picture and send it to. There's a link on this slide, and we'll also share that in the upcoming newsletter about this. So that's yellow-legged hornet, important pest. There's all kind of yellow jackets will also go to nests, and lots of other wasps will go to hives. So kind of keeping your entrances reduced and easily defendable by the bees is really first line of defense, and clearing any dead bees from in front of the hive is helpful as well. Okay, next slide. So critters, all different kinds of critters, skunks, raccoons, mice, cane toads, can all be a problem depending on where you live around hives. They'll live under the hives. They'll try to scratch at the hives to get the bees to come out and eat them. In the case of skunks, they may try to move into the hives like mice or rats, and they'll be able to chew through wood or screen bottom boards or varroa trays or whatever they need to get in there, if they have adequate time and opportunity to do so. You can add screens and metal grates underneath of the hive to avoid pests like this. Adding electric fences around your hive is helpful. Chicken wire, things like that. There's also, I guess, adding traps if you have critters nearby. It's, I guess, having the hive elevated in an area that's cleared, so that they don't have a lot of hiding places to get up close to the hive and work on making their entrance is really the best preventative method. And next slide. Bears. So bears can be a big problem, and we have a usage guide on bears and how to bear prevent your apiary. It's best to do that prevention up front, adding an electric fence around your apiary to keep bears out before they ever get a taste of honey that's there, because otherwise they're just looking at that electric fence as an obstacle, and so they're going to try to get in, and if they can unground one of the wires or break a branch to knock over a fence line, then they will, to try to get back into the hives. We've had a couple of Primal Bee hives involved in bear attacks, and the damage was a lot more minimal than I've seen in a lot of the wooden hives. But that's not to say they're bear proof. It's best to have this prevention up front, otherwise on an apiary scale. Otherwise, the bears will come back and do more damage. Next slide. So real quick, I just want to talk about my approach to any kind of pest, and I use integrated pest management, IPM. Next slide. And you can look up IPM for just about any kind of pest. If you have problems with termites or cockroaches or mosquitoes or different things like that, there's an IPM pyramid for them. And basically, you're trying to use the least dangerous method for humans or for non-target organisms, and work your way from cultural practices to mechanical practices. If they don't work, try some big biological practices, and lastly, kind of resort to the chemical. And the reason why is because of resistance. So using the same chemical over and over again, the pest can build a resistance to it, where they have less of a chance to build up resistance to biological, mechanical, or cultural practices. So we'll go to the next slide, and just to kind of add one more layer to this beekeeping IPM idea is the main thing is you want to really monitor your hives and understand those pest populations. And as you see those pest populations come up, there's a certain level of ants that you can deal with and be like, okay, this isn't a problem. But then it becomes more of an issue, when you see that the ants are doing some damage or taking some resources from the hive, right? This is our economic injury level, we want to try to control this before it goes up to our economic injury level. That's causing us more time and more money. So doing these preventative methods can help it to knock it below, the population down, whether it be cultural or mechanical, biological, or when you're doing a chemical. It's important to watch those populations of the pest and see the impact that it's having before it becomes a real issue. Kind of cutting it off before the pest population is doing major damage to your hive. So I'm going to leave it there. That was about 15 minutes, and I have lots more to talk about with all of this, but would love to get to your questions. So I'm looking in our chat now to see what questions we might have.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yes, that was great, Jason, as always. I will keep this chart up because I think folks might have questions about it too. Right now, I have a few questions that I want to throw up for you just to start off from our LinkedIn and our Facebook posts. So the first one that came up early was, how do I tell small hive beetle damage apart from wax moth damage if I just see a mess in the hive?
Okay, great question. So wax moths, they in the pupal stage or the larval stage, while they're getting ready to become pupa, they spin cocoons. So you'll see kind of a silky webbing, and they also defecate in this cocoon webbing. So you'll see little bits of frass or wax moth poop kind of mixed into the webbing, and so that's an indicator that you have a wax moth issue. Wax moths will also tunnel in through the comb. So if you look at the comb, you may see like a tunnel of a caterpillar kind of making its way through some of that brood comb, eating the brood, or even through the food, kind of eating the pollen. They don't seem to go as much towards the honey, but they'll make a mess of it. Small hive beetles are more grub-like, and so they don't have like extra little legs at the end of their abdomen, it's really good to kind of take a good look at a picture of both a wax moth and wax moth larva and small hive beetle larva kind of side by side to see this difference. But they also don't create webbing, and they're going to change the smell of your hive. So when you open up your hive, it's going to, because of this yeast ferments in the honey that the beetles carry, it gives off a smell kind of like a bakery. It's going to smell like bread being baked. And so when you open this up and you start to smell that, then that's indicator you may have a problem. It'll eventually, they could slime out the honey, which is going to be your economic injury level, right? So you want to try to control this before you see larva. If you do see larva, then that's a definite time to do some control, and maybe removing a frame that has small hive beetle larva on it to kind of quarantine that away from the rest of the frames before they're able to move around. But yeah, that's main ways to look at, I guess, the differences between small hive beetle damage is going to be this bready kind of yeasty, your honey's going to get to a mess that way, or wax moth damage where you're going to see more webbing and frass and tunneling happening.
So you're kind of assessing, you're seeing and smelling what, like you're using all your senses to kind of assess what the damage is, basically.
Yeah. So, and if you do have either problem, sometimes it's helpful to freeze frames. If you have a large walk-in freezer, this could help to kill the eggs that might be on those frames. The eggs are microscopic, so it's going to be hard to otherwise know that you got rid of all the wax moth eggs or small hive beetle eggs if you had a really bad outbreak. But also both small hive beetles and wax moths tend to become a bigger problem in a hive that's less populated and a weaker hive. Both also tend to go to like abandoned hives or equipment that's left out, or in storage that they can access. So kind of keeping all your equipment closed, tidy, and nothing out that might attract small hive beetles or wax moths is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have a question that just came in the chat. So Eddie says he's had an ant problem in the feeder, thinks he has it under control, but there's a lot of empty space in the feeder super. He heard there's a larger feeder box or bag that fills the super in lieu of the jar that it's set up for, and wonders if you're aware of the feeder bag or a box that works well.
Yeah, so there's several different feeders that we tried that worked well. I guess you want to avoid anything that's going to leak or create, excess sugar water anywhere in that super, because that'll be attractive to ants. So a tight fit works best. I prefer the quart-sized mason jars. It seems like I don't have a problem with ants if I invert the feeder away from the hive, and let it drip out before putting it into the hive, so that there's not any extra kind of dripping happening. As far as a larger feeder bag, we are working on another feeder solution, but it's pretty far down the pipeline. There are other kinds of feeders that folks have tried on the Hive Mind, our Facebook forum. So I would recommend checking that out. There's a kind of square feeder that fits in the super that has a hole at the top that bees can kind of access a sponge type material, or a funnel sometimes that brings the sugar water down to them. I haven't tested all the feeders, so I couldn't give recommendations on every type, but those I have tried, I'm happy to chat more about. I think the key thing is just trying to keep it clean, so that there's not any dripped syrup or sugar. There is this mountain camp method that some folks have used, where basically they put some newspaper on top of the frames and put a lot of sugar on there. And that can attract ants. It can become a real mess in the hive. It can crumble down through the hive and, create more attraction points. I wouldn't recommend it in the Primal Bee hive or Langstroth, really, to be honest. But yeah, there are those methods as well. I would think it's better to use something where, like a fondant or pollen patties as well. You have to be careful of them. I try to just give my colony a very small sample, maybe the size of a Post-it note, instead of the whole full sheet that they give you for adding a pollen patty, just to see if they're going to take it or not. Because if they don't take it, then it's another attractant there for ants, for small hive beetles, for wax moths. I've seen all of them kind of in either fondant or protein patties. So definitely be careful with what you're feeding. Make sure that it's getting used up and removing any that are leftovers. Hope that helps.
Yeah, awesome. Eddie, let us know if that answers your question. Someone also asked if there's anything they can add directly to sugar water that repels wasps without also repelling or harming the bees.
That is a really interesting question. Yeah. I have never, I hadn't thought of that. That would be great if possible. But wasps and bees are so closely related. They're basically cousins. So the bees, the wasps, and the ants, they're all in the same group called Hymenoptera in the world of insects. So they all, have very similar. I guess they have different diets for their protein source, but for their sugar source, they're all going to nectar or sweet, things like sugar water. I think for the wasps, really the best thing is to have your entrance reducers on. Then the bee, I guess they can't get into the hive as well. The bees can better defend the entrances. Removing wasp nests, if you're able to find them and have them removed safely, that's another, good preventative measure. But yeah, I hadn't heard of something that we can use, that would harm the wasps, but not the bees. Wasp spray, hornet spray, that would harm the bees as well.
Right.
If you have bait traps, sometimes the bait traps, for wasps and hornets can actually attract more wasps and hornets to your area, because now they're attracted to these bait traps, and they're going to look for alternative resources near those bait traps, which could be your hives. So I would use those carefully. And And the bees could also, show up in certain bait traps as well. Some are kind of better at sorting out whether wasps are getting into the bait traps or bees, but there's the potential for non-target bees going to a wasp trap for food.
Right.
So good things to consider.
This is a similar question, but when does it make sense to just reduce the entrance versus buy a robber screen?
So I've seen most of the time my entrance is, putting an entrance reducer in has kept out most of the problems in my hive. I did use a robber screen just to test to see if it works, and you can put a robber screen on the front of the hive. You tend to get what looks like a bit more bearding, but I think it's more just a traffic jam of the bees as they're learning how to navigate the robber screen. But there's a robber screen from Bee Smart that fits on the Primal Bee hive. You just have to kind of pin it and align it right in front of the entrances. And you may have to also add a filler kind of where your entrance reducer holders are on the front of the hive. If anyone wants more details about how to use a robber screen on a Primal Bee hive, I'm happy to help with that. But both are, I guess you have the entrance reducers with the hive for free. They came with the hive. If you need more, let us know. We could get you more. We have hard plastic entrance reducers that some of our earlier customers might not have gotten. They might have gotten only the softer EPS material. So if you need a hard plastic entrance reducer, let us know, and we'll get those out to replace the others. The others were a bit more fragile. So if you can break it, then you may have the old version. If you can't break it, then you have the new version. But let us know about those. These have 6 holes in them. The older version had 4 holes, so another way to tell. And we are happy to send you out more. We're actually in the process of making another redesigned entrance reducer that'll have a slight ledge to it that'll make it easier to pull out and put in. But I use rubber band, like I've used rubber bands. They kind of tend to break over time. But pieces of wire, twist ties, things like that, you can put through the holes so you can easily adjust or pull out the entrance reducer as you need to. And for most of the things that's worked. The robber screens are pretty inexpensive. That if you know you're in a high wasp dense area and you're seeing them get bypass the entrance reducers, that's when I would maybe pick one up. But I think you can get them for around $10 or $20, under $20 for sure.
Great. This one's a little long for me to put on the screen, but someone mentioned that they had a weak hive that got robbed out and then hit hard by wax moths. And they were wondering, this is a little bit more, I guess, about storing frames over winter, but if storing the frames in the garage over winter instead of a proper, like unheated below freezing shed risked the risk that infestation. And maybe we should talk about how to store frames to prevent
Sure.
pests, and especially over winter, but also, moving from summer into the fall.
Yeah. Great questions. And this also comes into honey harvest, which some of you are, your supers are starting to fill up and you're starting to run out of room for new supers or super frames. And so what I do is when I'm going into my hive, if I have a super on that has 8 frames and all 8 are honey bound, I'll go in and I'll pull at least 4 of those frames and I'll put them in a black. They're from Sterilite, and I could put up a link for this if I could find it later. But you can find these at Home Depot or at Walmart, and it's a black storage bin that has a clear lid and it has a rubber gasket in the lid so that when you seal it, it's actually dust proof and waterproof. And you can store 10 to 12 frames in these. They make different sizes. I'm not sure if they have a size big enough for the nest frame, but for your super frames, this is ideal storage. I've had them in a garage that gets maybe down to 40 degrees at the coldest, but up around 80 or 90 degrees at the warmest, and the honey's been fine. Honey would be fine anyway up in the upper 90s because that's what it can be inside the hive, and it's capped with wax. And so, but I guess I would try to aim for like a 80 to 50 range, is great for long-term storage. I've had honey stored in these bins for over a year, and it's still been fine when I open it back up. You want to make sure that it doesn't have wax moths and things like that on it when you do store it. Otherwise, they're going to be a problem. And I like that it has a clear lid, so I can kind of peek in to see if I see any wax moths or anything like that, without having to open the lid and inspect it more. But they've kept ants out, and great addition to your beekeeping toolbox. Other folks use chest freezers, so having a deep freezer that you can kind of put things into and store it in that way, in a garage. That's it's going to change the honey slightly, and you're going to want to thaw it a bit for you add it back to the hive, if you decide to do that or harvest anything from it. It is good for controlling certain pests. With wax moths, I usually double bag them in one of the tough, very thickest ply you can find, landscape type bags, like the drawstring, and I'll usually bag it once, and then I put the handle side down in a second bag, and then tie it again. They don't seem to go through 2 layers of those plastic bags, but they can chew through plastic. So important to kind of make sure you have it well sealed and potentially freeze it to kind of stop the damage or the population from growing at all. So yeah, that's kind of my take on storing frames. Happy to talk more about any of that. But
Great.
Yeah.
Someone's wondering if fire ants, there's an old wives' tale, I guess, about them eating small hive beetle larvae. Is that a real thing, they're wondering, or is that just a myth?
Yeah, that is. I mean, that's one of the ways that when we saw small hive beetles in Florida on some of our frames, you could, brush the beetles onto a fire ant mound and they'll take care of it, or shake some of the larvae onto it. Folks use both wax moth larvae and small hive beetle larvae that could feed it to their chickens. So it's kind of another way to get rid of that material, but it's high in protein and good for the other critters. You want to be careful of having rotten fruit around the apiary, because that could attract small hive beetles too, and small hive beetles can reproduce on rotten peaches or oranges or apples or different things like that might be around the hive. So keeping that sanitary is important. But yeah, I might have gotten off track there with that. We were talking about the fire ants, but no,
that's great.
Fire ants never really seemed to be a problem for my hives in Florida. That they didn't, really go up. They were the most problem they had was when you're carrying a super full of bees and you walk through a fire ant mound and have them crawling up your legs. That's kind of the biggest problem. So trying to know where they are in your apiary, the fire ant mounds, maybe have them marked or remember where they are so you can put some small hive beetle larvae in if you happen to have that problem in your hive. That's a good thing to do. Just be careful about accidentally trudging through them, because it's worse than a bee sting, in my opinion, having a bunch of fire ants get at you.
Agreed. Awesome. Okay, this is a good question. So this is one I pulled from a forum, so I kind of summarized it. But this beekeeper built multiple styles of robber screens, and he kept finding the yellow jackets were finding ways to get around the edges anyway, which I'm sure is a common problem. So is there a screen design that that actually holds up, or one that you recommend, or one that you've found that works for you when you've had to use one?
Yeah, so I haven't had the problem of the yellow jackets even bypassing the Primal Bee entrance reducers in any of the hives that I've observed yet. And I haven't heard about this from any of our clients yet. So if you are, having an issue with yellow jackets going in through the entrance reducers, please let me know. And as far as robbing screens, the Bee Smart robbing screen is the one that I found that best fits the Primal Bee hive in general.
Yep.
With slight modification. But we are looking at the potential for making a robbing screen that's more specific to the Primal Bee hive, should the yellow jackets or these yellow-legged hornets, figure out a way to get bypass what we have right now. So in short, kind of the Bee Smart for if you have a Primal Beehive, that I can tell you would fit. And whether the wasps or yellow jackets can find their way around that, I haven't tested. So
Great. And I'll link to that in the chat as well. Another question that one person had is they mentioned that they put petroleum jelly and cinnamon on their hive stand and their legs, but still had an ant problem. And they're wondering if there's anything that's worked for you really well long term, or if there's anything that has worked for you for like really troubleshoot resistant, I guess, ants.
Yeah, sure. Cinnamon never really helped me. I've tried it a few times, and the ants kind of just ignore it, or it blows away too fast. Petroleum jelly kind of dries up, where the dust collects on it, and it becomes less sticky pretty quick. Tanglefoot is really the best thing that I've used, and I've used it to protect populations of endangered Hawaiian yellow-faced bees in conservation and research studies. And so I guess that's how confident I am of working with Tanglefoot. It's really, really sticky. So I'd wear gloves when you're using it, maybe have a popsicle stick or something like that, or a small disposable paintbrush, for when applying it. But it looks like it's happy. If you get it on your hands, you have to use like a very gritty soap to even get the stick off of your hands. But it's not toxic. It's made of carnauba wax and other types of tree resins. And it's not very attractive to the bees. Every once in a while, I'll see a bee get caught in it if I have a really, heavy dose of it on the hive stand. But it really only takes a couple swipes around the legs of the hive stand, and ants can't walk across it. That being said, you do have to reapply it every couple months, less often than you would with petroleum jelly. And depending on where you live, if you're somewhere really sandy where debris is catching on it very easily, or very dusty, or pollen, things that can kind of make it less sticky, you may have to reapply it more often. The ants could also use a bridge. So if you have tall growing grass that goes above the tanglefoot but touches the hive, ants will use that piece of grass as a bridge to get up and go past it. So kind of keeping your grass trimmed, or branches from potentially touching the hive that the ants could use as an alternate route to get to the hive is important.
Yeah. This is another one that I think is a good one from the forum. Someone is talking about small hive beetles, similar kind of situation where they mentioned trying apple cider vinegar, diatomaceous earth under the hive, and they still feel like nothing is working. Is there anything to try to do if they still feel like nothing is working? Or is that maybe a symptom of something else going on in the colony? Is there maybe like another preventative measure that should have happened before then? Is this a sign that maybe it's like time to call it quits, I guess, at that point? And I can add this to the screen.
So tried beetle jails with the apple cider vinegar. I'm not sure if you also used mineral oil, but if you have only apple cider vinegar, that'll attract the beetles into those beetle jails. But the mineral oil is what kills them. So adding some mineral oil is important to that apple cider vinegar. But again, the beetle jails aren't 100% effective. We're still seeing beetles find other places to hide besides the jails, and the bees have a really hard time, kind of controlling them. A lot of times they'll propolize them into jails of their own making, and kind of try to keep the beetles away from the hive in that way. I find kind of squishing them with the hive tool is, as I see them, is helpful in kind of reducing their population where we had big problems with them. So when I was at University of Florida in Gainesville, we had small hive beetles in all of our hives, and we were just really trying to keep them down to a minimum. We'd crush them when we saw them. We'd shake them into fire ant mounds. We would use these apple cider vinegar traps. I didn't like the blue cloth trap because sometimes I saw bees catching into it. The diatomaceous earth, we have to use that more often. sometimes putting a ground cloth or something that they can't access the soil directly beneath the hive helps to, at least push them further away. But the beetles can walk for miles or fly for miles, after they've pupated in the soil to get back to the hive. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's a big problem, and we don't have a lot of great solutions for it. But really keeping the hive super strong and keeping mindful of this population, and you may have some colonies that are doing better than others, and kind of trying to replicate that success where you can, and try to, like, any challenges you find, kind of work through them. If you, especially trying to cut it off before it becomes a big problem, like you're getting that yeasty smell and you're seeing larvae inside the hive. That's really the, I guess, kind of best prevention you can do.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is like treat it before it gets to be a really visible problem.
Yeah.
But I think this is the first mite question we've gotten, and I think this is a good one to talk about with IPM. So this person is trying to go treatment free, doesn't test unless they see something crazy. They just treat mites once they hit around 50 mites in a 24-hour drop. Is that way too high, or does it depend on the setup?
So with the Primal Bee hive, what we recommend is if you hit around 30 mites over a 3-day drop. So this is about 10 mites a day. And by doing this kind of replicated over 3 days, you get a better idea really of what's going on. You could have a very low mite count in a 24-hour drop, or a very high mite count in a 24-hour drop. But having it over 3 days gives you a better average. I would say 50 mites in a 24-hour drop would probably be a high population of mites. So, I try to recommend around 10 mites a day, or 30 mites in 3 days would be ideal. And I'm not going right to oxalic acid if I see, there's 30 mites in 3 days. Some folks might. I prefer to try to follow this IPM approach that I shared. So I would start with removing some drone brood. The mites develop in drone cells. They reproduce there and faster. And so that's kind of where the root of my problem is. So I use wax and wire foundation, so I can just cut off pieces of drone brood on plastic foundation. You could use a hive tool or a paint scraper, to a putty knife to kind of scrape off drone brood and kind of remove any mites that might be developing in that drone brood. And then I'm not adding anything to the hive that might harm the bees. I'm only taking away drones, which usually aren't very helpful for that particular colony at that particular time. So, so that's how I, and then from there, if I do a mite count again, so basically the way we do our drops is, or mite counts, is we take out the Varroa tray and we spray it with some generic cooking oil, just to make it a little bit sticky. And then we put it back in. So we're putting in a clean Varroa tray that's got, a layer of grease to it that would stick to the mites. We put it in for 3 days, and then we pull it out and we count how many mites are on it. And you can use, actually, there's apps. You could take a picture of it and, have AI tell you how many mites you have on that screen if you're not sure. You can send us a picture. I'll try to, analyze it for you. But basically, if I see more than 30 mites on that tray, then I'll go to that next level. I'll do some type of treatment. I'll remove some drone brood, and then I'll wait a week or two, and I'll do another check and see if my mite count's higher or lower. And if it's lower, great, things are working. And if it seems to be higher, then or the same, unchanged, then I may try something different. I might try stinging nettle is something that's just been shown, to be helpful as, used in smoker fuel or with an alcohol spray, that could be helpful for mites. And so using Noroa, this is a feed that you can give to your bees that interferes with the mite's ability to reproduce. Things like that, I would probably kind of lean towards first. And then if those don't work, kind of move my way up that scale maybe using something that's potentially more hazardous to my bees, but very safe, with the most precaution that I can. So
Awesome.
that's my personal approach. Yeah, I hope it helps.
And I'll link to the usage guide for this because we do have a very specific protocol for mites for Primal Bee hives to help you be very successful that we've tried a lot and seen used across a lot of different regions to make sure that it's well tested. So Charlie just asked a good question. So he was wondering if you've ever used Grub X. I'm assuming it's a type of product under your hives to help control small hive beetles.
I have not I guess with that particular brand name, Grub X. I have used, there was, when I was at University of Florida, it was still in testing, but there was a nosema, sorry, not a nosema, a nematode drench. So basically it's a mixture. You would take live nematodes, put them into a liquid, and they would basically reanimate or become ready to add to the soil. We'd add them to the soil, and these live nematodes would go around and eat small hive beetle larvae that were pupating in the soil. And it seemed to be helpful from the studies that we did, but it again would have to be reapplied very often depending on the type of soil you have, whether your soil is saturated, that would affect it compared to if it's super dry. And so soil condition had a big role to play in that. But I haven't personally used Grub X under my hives to help control small hive beetles. I'm going to take a note of that though, and see if any of my colleagues have used that, or if I can find any research online that shows that would be a good option for folks. Thanks for the question.
Well, this was actually something I just saw in the forum. Someone mentioned that follower boards, or really any dead space, and this is just another interesting question I hadn't heard before. So someone told them that follower boards, or really any dead space bees can't patrol, is basically what invites pests in the first place. And they were wondering if this is really the root cause of pests. I'm curious to hear your take on that, because I know that follower boards are kind of the beekeeper's only real responsibility, as we've talked about, in terms of managing the hive. So
with the growth of especially with the growth of the Primal Bee hive, kind of you're trying to focus their area on one side, of the hive till they grow that up, and then you can let them have more and more access to the hive to patrol. But I haven't really seen issues with pests going into that empty space while it's, while the colony is growing. I haven't seen that be a problem. I've seen more of a problem with older hives. Like, I've done beekeeping for about 20 years. I've worked with top bar hives. I've worked with, all kinds of wooden hives. And those over time tends to break down, and some of the seams, come apart. And so it's making multiple access points that the bees can't really defend from all. And also having very old comb in the hive, over year after year after year, this can also cause a pest pressure. A lot of debris on the bottom board can cause pest pressure. Small hive beetles can hide in that, pile of dead bees or wax, shavings that kind of fell down onto the bottom board, or so kind of keeping that the screen bottom board clean, and keeping the varroa tray clean is important. I haven't really seen an issue with follower boards increasing the level of pests in the Primal Bee hives. The other way, I guess I've seen less pests in Primal Bee hives because they fit together so well. So the lid has, it has a bevel on the inside of it, like going up one step on a staircase, and this fits kind of right onto the nest box, so that there's not a direct path that the pest would be able to make through that. They'd have to go in and then up and then over to get into the hive, versus just right in through a hole or something like that.
Right.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Great. This is, I think, just a good question to know. I think this person's wondering if they need to pull their honey supers off before they treat, or is that only for certain treatments?
Yes, great question. And it really does depend on the treatment. Certain treatments, and I would recommend just reading the label on whatever treatment you're planning to use to make sure that it's safe to put that treatment in your hive when honey's on the hive. Otherwise, it could be dangerous to humans that eat that honey. It could contaminate the honey. So certain treatments you do need to, other treatments you don't. Some treatments they recommend not having the honey supers on. For instance, Varroa, it would contaminate the honey in a way that would be harmful to humans or to bees or the honey itself if you had the honey supers on with Varroa. But it would kind of reduce the purpose of the treatment because the Varroa needs to go into the cells that the bees are using, not that's going to eventually be harvested by the humans. And so having only kind of nest frames when you're treating with Varroa is important. So you're getting the food where it needs, or the treatment where it needs to be. But yeah, it's really an individual case depending on which treatment we're talking about. If you have specific questions about a certain type of treatment, then feel free to send them my way. I'm happy to try to give you
definitely let us know.
guidance. Mm-hmm.
And then this one's about oxalic acid, which I think is important because I know that's what we recommend for mites in the Primal Bee hive. And this person is wondering if there's an ideal outdoor temperature for doing oxalic acid vaporization, or does it not matter as much as people make it sound?
So I think it's important. I think the actual outdoor temperature is important, and I would go by the directions on your vaporizer, because they've tested to see what's the best for that particular brand as well as the chemical. So it's going to be specific to the type of vaporizer you're using and to the type of oxalic acid that you're adding. So yeah, I don't have the temperature range right in front of me, but I could help look it up for you. And let me just take a quick look and see if I can find a quick recommendation for best outdoor temperature for oxalic acid treatment, oxalic acid vaporization.
Yeah.
And I'll let you know if I. So it's typically around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is so the bees aren't tightly clustered and the treatment can spread through the hive more evenly. So your best outdoor temperature, they're saying, they want it so that you don't have a tight cluster. If you get much colder than that, you'd have less of a cluster. But in the Primal Bee hive, there is, less of a cluster because it's a good environment for the bees. So I don't believe it would be as much of an issue. While one beekeeper does say that 37 degrees Fahrenheit is the minimum threshold for doing OAV outdoors. So this may have to do with the actual vaporization machine, or the vaporizer, or some other kind of chemical change with that temperature. But yeah, those are considerations I would take with my temperature. We do recommend going in with the vaporizer through the feeder hole if possible, because this will get the oxalic acid treatment at the top of the brood frames where most of the brood is, like the top third or 2/3 of the frames. If you were to go in through the bottom, this is also possible, kind of going in through the entrance. You do need to remember, I guess, the vaporizers that have a hot wand, heat will damage the EPS if it's hot enough for an extended amount of time or in direct contact with the EPS. So we were going to recommend using either silicone sleeves or something that doesn't conduct as much heat as kind of a adapter or barrier. But yeah, we found going in through the top is best because the chemical is heavy and tends to fall. And so this will make sure it gets through the whole hive and you'll see the vapor coming out of the entrance. Going in through the bottom, the bees also fan down, so it may not reach the top. So kind of keeping that in consideration. Also, with any vapors or aerosol kind of control treatments that are airborne in the hive, remember that the concentration inside of the Primal Bee hive is going to be much greater than in a Langstroth hive because there's not as much dissipation. So we don't have those chemicals seeping out of the hive during the treatment. It all gets confined in there, and this can be sometimes too much for the bees. So I would recommend going with the smallest dose possible and kind of working your way up as you need to if you see in your mite drops that you're not getting the results that you want, rather than trying to hit it with the highest dose you can, because you may end up harming your bees.
Yep. Awesome.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, and we'll have a great, I'll link out to our usage guide, which really goes into specifics on timing and dosage and what we recommend and all of those things.
Great.
I think this last question, we have 5 more minutes. So if anyone has any last minute questions, definitely drop them in the chat. But this is the last one I have for us today, unless any others get dropped in. But this is related to more critters and bears. So someone mentioned they keep hearing mixed advice. Some people say a low wire near the ground handles both bears and skunks. I think this is just kind of depends, but others say you need a completely different fence for each. Do I actually need multiple setups? Any advice for this person? I think it depends probably on where they live, and I'm guessing kind of the size of their space, but
yeah, there's actually a really good guidance that I believe we included in our usage guide about bears, a video from University of Florida that talks about kind of how to set up your electric fence for bears. And I believe he spoke a bit on that about having a lower wire, to help with smaller critters. But I'm not 100% sure. I would say kind of your things like mice that live underneath of the hive, or potentially skunks, that are close by the hive, kind of using a smaller mesh screen would be better to try to keep them away, or, than electric fence. I think an electric fence is really for the larger mammals, maybe raccoons, bears, but I think skunks and mice and rats and things like that can generally get under it pretty easily with a little burrowing. So
right.
you may need to have different setups or different preventative measures for the different kinds of animals.
Yeah. Got it. Awesome. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I think we can wrap up. As I mentioned, folks, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll send all of this, including a full recording, in our newsletter tomorrow, and all of you are signed up for that by nature of being in our Facebook group. We'll be hosting one of these every month, so definitely let us know if you have any thoughts or really strong desires for what you want us to cover next. And as always, thanks so much, Jason. This was awesome. So appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hope this was helpful for you. If you have any more questions, you can always reach me at jason@primalbee.com. I'm happy to help how I can. All the best to you and your bees.